Good people, it's important before we begin an evening like this that we check inside of ourselves and look at the discrepancy between our ought and our is. And this discrepancy, if we feel it, creates in us a space to be guided, because the world needs to be guided now out of the dark place in which we are and out of the pain place in which we are. So if you can get in touch with that for a moment and let it out in a sigh. Oh. That's a Hirhu Tshuva. That's a moment of saying, please, Rabbeinu Shalom, dear God, help me to become what I ought to become. And with this, I think we can go and proceed.
Welcome, welcome everyone. Can you hear this mic? Can you hear me over here? Hi, my name's Shir Yaakov Feinstein Fait. I'm the musical director of Romemu. Thank you all so much for being here. And without further ado, I want to welcome John Bowen and the Weston Presbyterian Church Gospel Choir. Breathe that in. We're going to take it to a slightly different place. We want to sing a song composed by Reb Zalman many years ago, Bati Lagani. And now a woman who needs very little introduction, Jade Natanya Allman, the Director of Development, Membership, and Outreach for Romemu.
I had the pleasure of meeting Reb Zalman when I was 17 years old in 1992. I was at an ashram, Shivananda ashram, and everybody there, most everybody was there was Jewish, and the swamis were Jewish. And I just started to, it was almost like an itch, like, well, there's gotta be something in Judaism. No. You know, I went through a foreign background, and I have a wonderful Jewish family, and they're very connected, but I never felt the spirituality in my own tradition. And so the rumor got around that there was a Jewish ashram in the area, which was the first year of Eilat Chaim. Got the catalog, and I thought, what? Ram Dass, Starhawk, rabbis, how could this be? How is this possible? So I signed up for this class. It ended up being with Reb Zalman, who I didn't know at the time. And it was really like coming home for me. It really was coming home. It was coming home in a new way, and coming home in an old way which was not really accessed yet, but I could kind of feel that my ancestors somehow were involved. And for those that know, Reb Zalman comes from a Hasidic background, and so when I went to Eilat Chaim, this was the first time that I was introduced to Hasidut, which is the mystical teachings in Judaism. And it really opened the doors for me. I ended up going to Israel and studying in Lubavitch Yeshiva, which didn't last that long. But it was really amazing. And I had the great pleasure of reconnecting with Reb Zalman and Eve in Boulder, Colorado. I was at Naropa University, which is a Tibetan Buddhist college. I think one of the most amazing things that I've learned from Reb Zalman is how to be in so many different traditions and how to be spiritually connected. And I remember when I was in Boulder, I would go to the Lubavitch community, you see Reb Zalman there praying, and fully, in his fullness, and then you see him in the renewal communities, Jewish renewal communities, and you see him in his fullness, and how important that is. And I really feel that this is the vision of peace. This is a vision that means so much to me, and as we move forward in this world, that we can really take the power and the message of Reb Zalman's. One of our other great blessings today is to have Rabbi Joseph Telushkin with us, renowned author who also doesn't need much of an introduction. We're very blessed. Along with the Telushkin family who's been davening with us since Romemu's been here. And for those that know, this is our 5th year at Romemu. This is such a blessing to be living this dream of renewal Judaism here in New York City. And we really should continue for many years to come. And I want to thank everyone here who's really brought this community forth. And so we should all be blessed to be together for many more years. And thank you. Thank you also, Alistair, for being hosting us as we grow.
I want to start out with a question. That's something that's interesting to me about the two of you, which, and is well known. Both of you come from Orthodox backgrounds, and both of you lived many years of your life as Orthodox Jews in the community. What do you carry with it? What are the lessons that have continued to affect you in a positive way that you carry with it from the Orthodox world? What does it have, in your perspectives, to still teach you? And yet, what were also reasons why you chose ultimately to live your lives outside of that world? I'll start with you, Reb Zalman.
First, I want to say I'm so glad, Reb David, that I see the Yom Melucha. To see the shul where you do it, and to hear Reb Shir Yaakov and the music and the enthusiasm that's here, because so many synagogues and churches have become mere life cycle celebration places. And no longer is there real prayer going on. No longer is there real celebration going on. And to see just how easy it was to get everybody to sing and to joy. So if you ever were to do a Skype geschäft so that I can watch you on Friday, I'd love to be able to do that, okay? Because it is really wonderful, and wherever there's life, wherever there's energy, people come to it. And if people say, what are we going to do if we want to revitalize our synagogue, our church, the answer is make sure there is life, that there is energy there. Having said that, I'm going to go and give you a response. I still think I'm Orthodox. But I'm Orthodox as you have to be in the year 2011. A lot of people are Orthodox if they had to be like in 1835. And that's very important, because when Korzybski was telling us about semantics, he was saying you have to do time binding. You know, when you say, let's say, liberty. If you say liberty 2,400 and some odd years ago, then you mean going out of Egypt, you know? If you say liberty in 1776, it's another word of liberty. And so I want to say, orthodoxy is to be able to say straight what you have to say, the right kind of teaching. And the teaching that has to be for this time is what we are talking about. So, and that comes because we are talking about renewal. So what was it about the orthodoxy of 1835 that first inspired me? I would have never gone to another yeshiva but the Lubavitch yeshiva. The reason was because in Lubavitch, the legacy of that is Reb Zalman was asked, will you go to Vilna or will you go to Mezerich? In Vilna, he said, I would learn Torah. In Mezerich, I'd learn from the Torah. Another way of saying, in Vilna, I'll learn how to learn, but in Mezerich, I'll learn how to pray. And the sense of, what do I need all the paraphernalia if I can't be close to God? And to have, as I had my Rebbe, Rabbi Joseph Yitzchak, blessed memory, being in his presence and hear how he prayed and having the sense that I was really present in an encounter with the divine by such a person. What did I learn from him? I didn't learn so many of the ideas, although the ideas are wonderful, and I learned about the miraculous order of things and how to understand the universe in a larger way. But the most important thing was tuning into his vibe. Tuning into his vibe meant that I could also daven afterwards. What did I have to reject? Well, there is, the words that speak to me these days are a distinction between the normative and the illustrative. I study the Torah, and there are certain things in the Torah that normatively don't apply. For instance, this Passover, I didn't take a lamb and slaughter it and do all this stuff with it. After all, but it's written in the Torah that I should do it. And everybody says, yeah, but it doesn't apply today. Once you say that, aha, it doesn't apply today, and then we have to start looking at the other things that don't apply today, such as not counting women to a minyan. And these were the things, the dissatisfactions that I felt with the given order of things, and at the same time knowing that I can't reject it, because if I reject that, I would be also rejecting the closeness with God. And that was important. So there was this way, and it didn't happen abruptly. It happened little by little. As I heard questions from people. I would meet holy people outside of our community. And I would see that they also honored and served the living God. And that was a very important part for me. So the ecumenism that was the contrary to the triumphalism in which I was brought up in Orthodoxy. Triumphalism meant that Mashiach will come and all those goyim are going to find out that they were wrong. They were returning the compliment, the second coming, and then Jesus will say, why didn't you listen to me the first time? And you could go on to all the other religions and you'd find the same kind of a situation. And I realized that, no, triumphalism is not what's going on. What's going on is, I can only be a friend to all those who respect you, God. And that's how it started for me.
It's interesting. If my friend Dennis Prager had made the point, said one of the most important days in the life of any person who has a passionate religious or political view is when they meet somebody who has a different religious or political view, and the person they recognize as both intelligent and good. Because it is such a standard thing in many movements to either to demonize your opponents as not being good or to dismiss them as being unintelligent. So, but you must have had a nitiyah leaning in that direction, I assume, because of your openness to seeking out wisdom in a variety of places. And what in your case, Reb David?
Well, first of all, I want to say that for all of you who are here, you can see very clearly and quickly how it is that I became infatuated with this man. And really, Birshus, I said, it's very clear just from listening to my Rebbe how immediately and inextricably I became linked to him, and how blessed I feel to be able to sit next to him, really, and to share any time at all. Is so precious for me and for my community. And so we really, with deep gratitude, modim anachnu, that you're here.
Yeah, but what troubled you with...
I'm going to tell you. You will remember, because the first time I saw you, I had come from a second attempt at becoming an Orthodox rabbi in my early 30s. And for me, I was pretty much at my last leg. I thought to myself, it's either this or I'm going to go open a yoga studio. This is it. I had grown up in a modern Orthodox home, and I also want to say that I'm really honored to have my parents here tonight. It's really a great honor. And the things that I remember from having grown up in a modern Orthodox home and having gone to a high school that was modern Orthodox and all these wonderful things, the things that I could never let go of were the kishke stuff, the stuff that gets into your insides, the sense of the emotive and deep resonance of God's presence that I would see when my father would sing Zmirot or Shabbos songs on Friday night, or even in my own ultra-Orthodox stage when I left high school, the sense of community, the sense of a really deep practice that was very enriching at that point, very much as you said. That was what it meant to me at that point in my life to be religious. And what started to tear at that fabric or erode that sense of Judaism being the only way was a kind of toxicity that I felt that I ingested from Orthodox Judaism. So I might not say that I'm Orthodox, although I love that. I might use that from now on. I'm Orthodox, but 2011. But for me, there were elements of Orthodoxy itself that felt extremely toxic to me, the kind of God image that I was, both loving and also fearing, and the kind of punitive element to the never good enoughness within Shmir HaMitzvot or living a Torah lifestyle. So for me, I began to feel what I later named post-traumatic God disorder. So I started to feel that I literally was being traumatized by my experience within the Orthodox world, and that in order to begin to feel what you said when you walked in here, that if there is aliveness, I didn't feel alive. And so for me, the search for aliveness took me from Chaim Berlin in Brooklyn to yoga and to Pilates and gyrotonic and to Buddhist Vipassana meditation and to zikrs and dancing and embodied spiritual practice and earth-based practices. And when I couldn't take it any longer, meaning I felt that I'd healed myself, but I missed home. It's like what Jade was talking about, I missed home. So I came back to Orthodoxy for the second time, and after 2 years of learning a lot of very intricate, interesting legal matter, I felt that I was going to dry up and I'm going to have to go back to Buddhism or yoga or something. And that's when I met you. And when I met you, it felt as if here was somebody who was so rooted in the tradition and for whom the tradition was so alive, but that you were retranslating it and re-inviting me into a relationship with things that I already knew, but now I knew it in a different way when I would listen to you. And it reminded me of everything that I had learned, and it was suddenly different. And I felt in you that it was sitting in you, what is often a contradiction. How can I, and how can I, and how can I? And it was all sitting inside of you in an easy place. And immediately I felt that I had a Rebbe, that I had someone who had been there and was going to help me navigate to, and that I was going to watch you and see how you did things. But that renewal itself and what you were modeling was already a graduation of sorts. A graduation from, you don't have to take it or leave it. If the Torah is no longer true in the way you thought it was true, it doesn't mean that it isn't true. And that if you have a yoga practice, that can also be a part of your avodat Hashem, part of your service of God. And that you didn't have to walk around thinking that one day Jews are going to have it and everybody else won't. That we can become chaverim, all of us together. And so for me, that was kind of my journey away and back and still moving.
I want to add that when you say you found a Rebbe, I found a Talmud. What was so remarkable that I didn't have to use explanations. I could use the shorthand of the traditional language, and it went with you. And if I wanted to explain something according to Ken Wilber, that wasn't so far away from you either. So all of this made it so easy for our transmission, and for this I give thanks to God.
Me too.
No, and that's very consistent, excuse me, with the Talmudic teaching that more than the cow wants the milk, more than the calf wants the milk, the cow wants the suckle, and how important it is to have that sense of Talmud. What I picked up as I was listening to both of you was what obviously had been very meaningful to you in your traditional life was that it had fed the sense of a relationship with God through prayer, And what I picked up, Rabbi David, what you were lacking was it somehow deprived you of a sense of optimism. Somehow the emphasis seemed to have been more on any of the violations, the thou shalt nots, rather than on the joy of what you were doing. Because it seemed unoptimistic somehow, and that's what seemed to be driving you away, which has often struck me, Reb Zalman, from what you said about your experiences in Chabad, with the emphasis on the simcha shel mitzvah. And I think that that's, in a sense, what seems to me, if I'm correct, is animating both of you now. How do you bring the joy of mitzvah to people who aren't often as knowledgeable about it? Let me turn to you, Reb David. I'm assuming, and to you, Reb Zalman, as well, but I'm assuming that that's what motivated you 5 years ago. If you had to set out, the West Side, among the things the West Side is not known for is a lack of synagogues. So obviously, anytime someone sets out to establish a new congregation, something is motivating them, right, and something that you felt was needed. I remember during the years we were living in Boulder, I once was invited to speak at a Malava Malka. I was one of 6 rabbis present for whom, I was the only one for whom the major frame of reference was not Kabbalah. But here, you know, there is something different. So what motivated you?
Well, I'd been the rabbi in residence at this Jewish ashram, which is really Eilat Chaim. It's more than just an ashram. It's not even an ashram, really, but it's an amazing container where all kinds of interesting programs are happening, at least in its earlier incarnation. And I was the rabbi in residence there for 2 years. And when I came back to New York City, I thought, wow, I want to create like an Eilat Chaim in New York City. Mm-hmm. What would it be like if we had a shul that honored the four dimensions, or the 4 worlds that Reb Zalman is frequently speaking about: the body, the heart, mind, and spirit. So I felt as though, although there were so many offerings on the Upper West Side, there wasn't, every other block had a shul. I thought there wasn't a place that really was like my home, personally. Mm-hmm. Like, I would want a place that would have, that would be willing to be a little bit more creative with liturgy, and basically put God and aliveness as the end, and then figure out the means to get there. Mm-hmm. Like, how are we going to walk out of the shul feeling really alive, really connected, and have that feeling, that experience be something that is rooted in the heart and also rooted in tradition? And I felt that there were many places like that, but I also wanted to find a place that would integrate the body and integrate mysticism in a much more frontal way. Kind of like, let's put mysticism at the front. Mm-hmm. So that each and every one of us has the ability to have a state experience where they experience God as bliss, as love, as all things. And why not have that as one of the end goals of a shul, is to teach and inculcate people to have that experience on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. So there's you know this very well, Ken Wilber likes to say, a philosopher named Ken Wilber likes to say that having a state change, going from one state of consciousness to another, is really beautiful. But having have your states become traits is the goal of spiritual practice. Mm-hmm. Have your states of consciousness become traits of consciousness means that it's not, one day on, one day off, that we've bumped up a level. So one of the best ways to do that is to have repeated state changes. That's why people come to shul. They come to shul because who they are when they leave is different than who they were when they came in, hopefully, right? And they know more, not just about, I don't want to be tongue-in-cheek, they know more about who they are, right? And who they are on the inside. And so that's kind of the end goal, so to speak, of Romemu. Have people coming into shul over and over again to have these state of consciousness changes, meaning more open-hearted, more loving, more compassionate, more connected with each other, and do it repeatedly, over and over and over again, until shul begins when you leave shul, not when you arrive. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm.
Reb Zalman, does that, to you, sort of define what Jewish Renewal wants to do, what you wanted to do? Are there additional factors there?
I first want to say that when we began, we had come out of orthodoxy, out of the Hasidic thing, and we asked ourselves, how do we know take that wonderful light and put it into containers that'll fit the people. So we were very experimental. It turns out that, you know, renewal has become Orthodox also, you know, and they want to do it the way in which we did it all the time. And they're not doing that kind of experimentation. Reb David does, because he has the background, and then he can ask the question. So the next holiday is going to come. The main issues of the holiday are, how are we going to take this beautiful light and put it into vessels now that will fit the people? So that's an important part of it.
Right.
There is another thing that has to do with, people ask me, you know, as I say sometimes to people, my tour of duty is soon going to be over. Not too soon, I hope, but it's going to be over. I have been deployed. It's not that I created it. I've been deployed. And now comes another watch. Other people now, it's on their watch, they're being deployed to do the thing. And it's really important to recognize that the renewal that'll be 50 years from now is not going to be the same that we did in the 70s. It's different. Things have changed and shifted. So renewal is a process that constantly happens. And to say that it's going to be set the way in which we have it now, it's a mistake. I like to always use the model of a tree. By the way, I got that from Howard Thurman. He would be speaking about the growing edge on the tree. Underneath the bark, every year, there's a new growing edge of the tree. If you cut this off and peel it off, the tree will die. That becomes the next ring afterwards. The old rings that are there from before are the way the orthodoxies that happened before. Can we do away with them? No, because they give the tree its solidity, so when the wind comes, the tree will stand and will not fall down. So we need the tradition. I feel that in renewal, we have to be able to make sure that we will be backward compatible. That's how you speak about computers today. And you say, if a new computer comes in, it has to be able to read the files of the past and be able to use them again. So we need to be backward compatible, but that's possible because of the rings of the tree. But each year, a new ring has to come in, so it's not possible to say that the ring for this year is going to be forever, because then the tree would die. Having said that, I get the idea that renewal has happened way, way back, that Moses renewed the Judaism of Abraham, and King David renewed the Judaism of Samuel, and so we could keep on going, and the Baal Shem Tov renewed the Judaism that was in his day. And I want to say, if you take a look where Lubavitch was many years ago, and where it is now that you can have a Seder in Kathmandu, then I want to say that's also renewing. Because my understanding is that once we have seen Earth from outer space, we get to realize that Earth is alive, and we are all cells of the body of our Mother, the Earth. That means that every religion is a vital organ of the planet. It would be silly to say that the whole world should be liver, you know? But a healthy liver helps the lungs get better and so on and so forth. So I think every religion makes that contribution to all the others. Right now, Nebuch Islam has got a big inflammation. We have some too, and Christianity has some too, you know, with our fundamentalists, there's a calcification and so on and so forth. But that needs to be healed. And so wherever there's energy, wherever there is life, that overcomes the dead cells that get sloughed off. And so I think renewal is an ongoing process, and I can't say it's going to be the same some years from now. If I get reincarnated again, I'll be curious to see what it's going to look like then.
If you, in the same way that when you described earlier, in a shift away from mainstream orthodoxy, you know, you felt that certain laws in the Torah maybe had to be rethought. For example, the counting of women in a minyan, which is not clearly so much in the Torah, it's, you know, more in rabbinic. are there some issues that you think need to be rethought in renewal?
Publishers are hard people to deal with. I did a book that I wanted to call, If You're So Universal, Why Be Jewish?
Which is a great title.
Yeah,
Right? Because that was my motivation in writing the book. But what happened was they called it Jewish with Feeling, which is sort of a parve, yesterday's gefilte fish, you know. But the book is a good book. And the first
It's a great
chapter,
book. It's a great book.
and the first chapter is, oi, what a word. Dealing with the word God, oi, what a word, because that word has been so terribly handled, right?
Yeah.
So in there, I describe something about Shabbos. And that's gotten me into trouble even with family people. What is it on Shabbos that we are not to do? We are not to make products, things that we can delegate to other people. It's called a malacha. Malacha is what you delegate. But what happens if some people do some things which according to the old rules were a no-no, but it's the only time that they can do it, turns out, on Shabbos, and they don't want to delegate it to somebody else. They want to do the little bit of gardening themselves, or they want to throw a pot themselves, or do a little watercolor painting themselves. What should I say? Should I say this is a no-no? I'm not going to say that, because I have a feeling that turning on the computer is a no-no. That for me is definitely the no-no of Shabbos. Even if I have a wonderful file that I want to read on Shabbos, no. Because I know the fence is necessary, because in between I'll take a look and see what news came in, you know. That's a no-no for me. So I have a feeling that the recalibration of what we need to do in order to live the life that God wants us to live has to happen from the point of view where we are. That's the reason why I was talking about not only kosher, but eco-kosher and bio-kosher. And that's very important today. And thank God it's taking root, and people are asking the right kind of questions at this point. And gradually, you know, renewal is not a denomination. I think renewal is a virus. And it's seeping into Orthodoxy and to Reform and to humanistic Judaism, wherever it is, because it simply says, this is how you bring it to life, and people want to say l'chaim.
Okay, I'm going to turn that question to you, David. Also, I have the thought, I'm not exactly sure if it even relates specifically, but when I was at YU, one of my favorite professors was Yitz Greenberg. And one of Yitz's teaching was, I don't care what denomination in Judaism you belong to, as long as you're ashamed of it.
Right.
And I thought, you know, the perennial God against self-righteousness. Right. Reb David.
Right. So I'm not altogether sure that I'm ashamed of renewal, but I think that some of the things that I would like to see renewal broach are, and we have to some degree, but I think that it needs further elucidation and further explication. One of the things that I think that would be great would be if there would be a clearer sense of principles around halachic process itself. We have a set of principles in place, and it's very difficult to codify principles that are based on this kind of thinking, because what is involved is not just giving over a set of rules, but a heart that can feel into each individual situation and know what the particular Torah or the halakha of that situation is, and to be able to think outside of the box also is absolutely, I think, critical. But I think that renewal will do itself a service in the next couple of years when it has a much more codified way of engaging the principles of Jewish law and being able to have application and apply it. I think also that Jewish renewal is, as Reb Zalman has said, is a virus, and it's important to acknowledge to some degree how it has had an influence in ways in which it has seeped into the various places unbeknownst to even to the places that have adopted it. And I also think that renewal, the question, b'dechilu rechima, with a little bit of fear, but to say to Reb Zalman, I'm not personally 100% clear what's the best way for renewal to continue in terms of its educational agenda Whether or not denominational status, I obviously agree that it's not a denomination. I mean, Reb Zalman founded it. So if he says it's not a denomination, it isn't.
They don't listen to me.
They don't listen to you.
No, it's interesting because Mordechai Kaplan, when he started Reconstructionism, said he didn't want it to be a denomination. He wanted it to be an influence on other movements, but it became ultimately a denomination. And you're saying you probably can be most effective if you don't actually become a denomination, because then you can affect others.
Right, but the difficulty, though, if we kind of look at what's hard, though, is it's hard to describe what renewal is then. In other words, people come and I mean, that's the question I get all the time. Well, what exactly, what are you guys doing? What is that place? What is it? And everybody thinks in categories. So if it doesn't fit into one of those categories, it's very hard to describe it. So recently I've been saying to people, and I'm not even sure if it's accurate, I've never even said this to Reb Zalman, but I say that we are Hasidic Reconstructionism.
That's not bad.
It's not bad, right?
It's Reconstructionist with 4 worlds and Davinology.
Exactly, that's what I'm thinking.
I want to say something more about this that has to do with today every Jew is a Jew by choice. The people who are running, as it were, the enclaves of committed Haredi people don't believe that we are Jews by choice. They feel that we are Jews by necessity. But when I look around and I see all the people here, every one of you has made some kind of a choice. When you're dealing with free people who are making choices, then what you want to create in a community is a consensus of the committed. Along with that comes something very important. I'm very much aware, we're in a house of worship here, but even if we weren't, this call is being monitored for quality purposes. Okay? We are not alone. We are not alone. This is very real. And I think when we can bring this back into the awareness of people that this consensus of the committed is in the presence of the living God, it's a whole other stuff. We are not so much in charge of it as we are giving consent to it.
And I want to say along the lines of that, what motivates, I guess, a rabbi in this 21st century with that reality is that the best have to is want to. That a Yiddishkeit that is compelling is something you really want to do. You know, people talk about commitment and having the tradition make a claim on us, and I think that that's a very beautiful frame. Have the tradition, there be a covenantal sense of the tradition making a claim on our lives. But as Jews of choice and Jews who make choices, will make choices usually that are part of an aliveness that we feel. So we say, I want to go light the candles because it makes me feel alive. I want to go to shul because it makes me feel alive. And even, I'm not saying that it doesn't make me feel joyous necessarily, even if it means being sad, or whatever the spectrum of feeling is, but aliveness is a core component of the motivation to choose Yiddishkeit. So when people say to me, I'm sorry, I know you want to say something, but when people say to me, why be Jewish? The answer I say is, because it's great.
Because
it's great.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's enriching. It's alive. It's compelling. And it in many ways, it meets a lot of the nutrients that we as Jews need. It meets the nutrient of it's a Jewish practice. It's a Jewish practice which connects me with the one who's monitoring this phone call. And so it has all of those components.
Rabbi Yossele has more stuff to
Okay.
Well, okay. No, as you were speaking, obviously we're each triggering things in each other. The traditions and the laws often speak a language of poetry. And what I think of, I'll just give you an example. It's a very well-known Jewish law that according to Jewish law, the Sabbath is inaugurated with the lighting of 2 Shabbat candles. How many of you here practice the custom of lighting an additional candle for every member of the household? Okay, that's quite a number. I remember speaking about this once with Abraham Twersky, who's quite a remarkable figure. Twersky comes from, he's a Hasidic Rebbe, and he's a psychiatrist, and he's done tremendous work. He's written about 60 books, but as he once said to me, he said, I really only wrote one book about self-esteem. I wrote it 60 times. But Twersky told me, he said he grew up in a household in Milwaukee where they practiced the tradition of lighting an extra candle for each child. And he said, growing up, it was wonderful for me to know that because I existed, every Friday night there was more light in my parents' household.
Wow.
You know, all parents hopefully tell their children that they love them. And 20 years later, many of those children end up in therapists' office saying, I never felt loved.
Right.
You know, so this conveys the ability of law to speak that language. Let me ask you about the role of another mitzvah in Judaism, and do you see this, how significant do you see it in its increase? One of the distinctive aspects of Judaism has always been its extraordinary stress on Talmud Torah, the study of Torah. You know, to the extent many sins are often forgiven if somebody at least learns. You know, and we know it can sometimes be done at the expense of other things. But how important is it? And how do you understand Torah? In other words, how significant is it for you that if somebody's involved in renewal for, let's say, 5 years, how significant is it to you, or do you think it should be, that at the end of the 5 years the person has acquired a better knowledge of Hebrew? How important is Hebrew in the ongoing transmission of Judaism and the learning of Torah in general?
When I wrote the book Paradigm Shift, there is a section there that deals with how to break the Sefer barrier. In other words, very few people, if they don't know the alphabet, they can't get into it. So then there was a question, how many words, verbs do you need to know in order to make your way through the Siddur? I came up with about 250 verbs, because Hebrew is a verb language, and I showed how it works itself out, that once you learn these verbs, you will be able to do that. Much of the Siddur will happen with the 250. If you want to add 250 more, you can walk through the Chumash with some awareness. So of course I bring this to people. The greatest joy that happens is, I go back to what you did at Eilat Chaim. He was bringing a text from the Ishbitzer, and everybody had it in front of them. And at that moment, so many people wanted to say something. It resonated with them. Just the same way as music doesn't happen when it's just written on a sheet. It has to be played in order to become music. So Torah doesn't become Torah until it is read and talked about. Divrei Torah. And so it was so wonderful to see that people who didn't have, what would I say, a great deal of Torah background, but once they saw the words in front of them and they had some insight and their soul was beginning to speak on those words. And we are doing that. Torah discussion before davening is always a good way to start. Am I happy with the status of where it is? I want to say no. When the FBI, not the FBI, what's the other one
CIA.
called?
CIA.
Central CIA. When they want to get some people to learn a language, they have such a good way. In California, there's an institute where they teach you how to get into a language so that you can pass where you're going. When I look at the way in which people have been teaching Hebrew school, I want to say we haven't been doing such a good job. I would like to see that people would put away during 6 years some money so they could spend a sabbatical in Israel and we'll have a real immersion learning in the language and the ulpan, and then get the traditional sources and so on. Then they come back and there are people who can enter into a limud, into a learning that's really a pleasure. It hasn't happened yet, but I'd hoped for that kind of an institute. I want to say that there are people who are trying to do good things with Jewish education and take kids to Israel and so on and so forth. But I've asked them, have you created a curriculum for the Lamed Vavnikas of the year 2050? In other words, we need those bodhisattvas, the Jewish bodhisattvas, to be trained because you need to have people who themselves will be able to reach in themselves higher vibratory levels so they can give it over to other people. And that, I think, would make the whole business of Torah learning so much more alive than merely, look, seminaries, I don't have to tell you, they do what they do in gross anatomy labs in medicine. There's a cadaver, and they cut it up, and that's how they study medicine. If an acupuncturist were to study on cadavers, he would never be able to be he has to work on living people. In the seminaries, they tell you how to parse it into the Hebrew, the Latin, the Greek, all that kind of stuff, and they're dealing with the text as if they're dead. That is not the way in which you can learn. If someone says, I'm going to teach you how God talks to us, what a difference that makes.
I just want to add,
Okay.
what can I add? Well, first of all, I'd like to back up to the Hebrew question. I think that we aren't doing enough, I think, within Renewal to break the Sefer barrier sufficiently. And I think that to some degree, obviously, it helps if you have Hebrew. Obviously, it helps if you have Hebrew. It helps if you have literacy. And there's no excuse any longer for a lack of literacy. If people have a desire to learn, we've never, ever had as much Torah available, just purely translated as as our generation. So to some degree, the emphasis on Limud Torah and learning Torah is something that, thank God, there are places like Machon Hadar and other places where people are really diving into textual learning, what I call textual healing. Textual healing is really important. I agree wholeheartedly that, when you speak that way, it's exactly that perspective that led me away from seminaries, which was, as a spiritual individual, I was wondering, it's all fine and good that I'm learning all of the halachot of Shabbat and the Jewish law on Shabbat and Jewish law on kosher and so on, but how do I open myself to God? Is there something that you can teach me, a skill that presumes that you could get better, a skill for opening the heart, a skill for opening to higher vibratory levels? Is there some kind of yeshiva? And so I can't tell you how many people come to me from JTS, HUC, and other seminaries, wonderful seminaries, but say, listen, my goal is to make it through the next 5 years without drying up so badly that I never want to ever come back to Yiddishkeit. I'm going to go and get my degree, and I'm going to hang it on my wall, and I'll have my ability to parse and so on. But on the side, I'm going to go do yoga, and I'll go to a kirtan, and I'll go to sit meditation. And so I very much resonated with that last thing, and then I wanted to come back for a moment to the Hebrew and just answer very directly that as much as the Hebrew is something that is a prerequisite for a certain level of being engaged in Jewish life, I know as someone who is fluent in Hebrew and who went to Hebrew school and yeshivas and all of that Hebrew more often than not in my life, in my prayer life, is somewhere that I hide, not somewhere that I feel at home. That when I hear Reb Zalman emphasize, as he has, vernacular praying in the language that you would most comfortably say to someone, I love you. Ava Rabbah Avtanu, with a great love, you love us. It's such a beautiful prayer. And I can't tell you how many times I've said it in my life without even thinking once that I'm actually being loved by God. And if I would have to say it in English, maybe not always in English, but sometimes say, oh God, you love me. I know you love me because you love my parents, and you've given us a tradition that helps us feel alive. And I experience you. I try to feel your presence in my life. That when I go from the Hebrew to the English in that dance, sometimes, often, the doors open that don't open when I'm in the Hebrew. Do you know what I mean? A little bit?
Yeah. No, I do. So then, how do you make the case? How do you then make the case for why is Hebrew? I mean, to you, are you to some extent being able to take for granted because you have the skill? What will happen ultimately if we raise a generation of Jews who don't know Hebrew?
We would be up a certain creek.
Okay.
I want to say that this is really clear, that unless you get people, take a look. There's a word ashrei. Everybody knows ashrei.
Right.
The Latin says beatus vir, for ashrei ha'ish. Happy as a man. But the word happy is not a good word. It doesn't mean like a happy hour, you know.
Yeah, right.
It doesn't mean that. So what is it? What is that feeling of ashrei? So I want to say you don't get to do this without somehow getting into the Hebrew of it. There's so many wonderful puns that we have when we talk about things in Torah, because the language is so elastic, it is so alive, so much. That's how the Baal Shem Tov was saying, come into the ark. But the Hebrew word for ark, and that's why the many meanings in Hebrew also means the word. Enter into the word. So in the Medrash Baal Shem Tov, there's a section, the largest section is on Parshat Noach, dealing with that particular sentence, where he's trying to talk about how do you get into the word? How do you get into the word? And I want to, this is for you, okay? There is a story in the New Testament. Man comes and asks the master the question, how should I pray? And he takes a prayer that was around in those days, but he places himself in the presence of his Father, and he said, Abundi b'shmaya, nitkadash shemach, teite malchutach, nehevit zivyonach. He speaks it in Aramaic, and he addresses the Father. Someone sits down and writes down what he said, and then it becomes a paternoster, and it gets to be rumbled, and people don't place themselves in the presence of God when they say it. So it's really important to learn about how does a person place himself in the presence of God. If they know Hebrew, it's wonderful, but even the best Rabbis would... Anybody here who speaks Polish? Huh? Okay, so this Rebbe, his name was Reb Yisrael Koshenitzer Magid. One day he's standing near a window and he sees a lad and a lass, a Polish young man and a woman walking by, and he calls her Kochani Mumoy, my beloved, yeah, my darling. So he was like, oh, Rebbeinu Shalom Kochani Mumoy, Avinei Hashem Melecha Neshuva. So he was using that in the middle of what people call an ejaculation. That doesn't necessarily always have to be with sex. There are certain prayers that pop out from the heart, you know, and he was doing it using that. But Hebrew is the language, I think, in which you can have nuances. Look, there are a lot of stuff that we're going to read in the Torah that sounds to us as lists of names. I'll tell you a Hasidic Torah. Most of you won't get it, but it doesn't matter. The Uvayom Hashmini, Nasi Livnei Menashe, Gamliel ben Podotzur. So if you translate this literally, it means on the 8th day, the prince who was in charge of the children of Manasseh, his name was Gamliel, the son of Podotzur. Comes a Hasidic master and says, Bayom Hashmini, on this fat, juicy day.
Because the word shmini is
also
8,
means
it
fat.
also has the root
Right.
means fat.
Yeah.
Vayom Hashmini, on the fat day.
Right.
Nasi, he can lift himself up.
Right.
B'nai Menashe, somebody thinks God has forgotten on me, I've forgotten about God. How does he lift himself up? All he has to say, Gam Li'el, I also have a God. Ben, if he understands it, Podotzur, God has redeemed him. Now take a look what happened in the way in which you couldn't possibly say it in any other way, to bring in so much stuff into a simple sentence of a census. So I'm trying to say that the language is important. And none of you, I would say, none of us, never mind, I include myself, are here for the first time. We're all recycled beings. Our planet is taking soul matter, you know, from even before, from animal levels to human levels, and has recycled it over and over and over again. And here we are. And we are not tabula rasas. We have been around before. Okay? There is a spiritual DNA. And I have a feeling that the languages are very important. If the Roman Catholics would not have eliminated Latin so fast and would have said, once a month you have to say the Mass in Latin. Even I worked in St. Michael's Church in Jerusalem. And there they do it in the vernacular. So what's the vernacular in Israel? It's Hebrew.
Right.
So there is a prayer that begins, lift up your hearts, sursum corda, and we're saying, God lul Adonai iti, and the nuns were answering, Uneromema shemo yachdav. So what a wonderful thing that was, you know? So the sharing, it just opens my heart when I see how other people love God. Sometimes I say people don't like me to say it this way, that I'm a peeping Tom. I like to see how people get it on with God. So I can learn also about that. So that has to do with why davening is so important. And people want to know where does the word come. It comes from the divinum, doing the divine thing. And just as benediction comes from benediction, you know?
Right.
And so I think it's really important that a lot of people come to synagogues and churches and are spinning their wheels, and they don't know what to do there in order to make it count for them, so it should have energy in there. That's why it's so important that people should learn it. And Hebrew also helps for that.
Okay. I think we've got a comprehensive. I remember once somebody telling me a story defining Jewish literacy. They were in Jerusalem, they needed bus number 5. So they saw a bus stop and they asked the guy who was standing there, "Hey, autobus mispar 5, does bus number 5 stop here?" And the guy answered, "Na ra'iti v'gam zakanti v'lo ra'iti kav 5 kan me'olam." He said, he asked, "Does bus number 5 stop here?" The guy answered, "I am a young man and now I've grown old and never have I seen bus number 5 stop here." I think, with your permission, I'd like to open it up for some questions.
Yes. With great joy. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.